Homemade and Don Yeager, Andrew Jackson, and the Miracle of New Orleans. It's the battle that shaped America's destiny, Part 2. Chapter 3. The Making of a General. They must be punished and our frontier protected, as I have no doubt that they argued only by British agents Andrew Jackson. After marching his troops back to Nashville, Andrew Jackson once again waited for Washington. His volunteers' enlistments had yet to expire. Most joined up for a year, but with no dispatch from the War Department ordering them into battle, the general released his militiamen from duty in the spring of 1813 and sending them home to tend to their families and their fields. Then he did the same. Life at the Hermitage had many obligations. A well-known horse breeder, Jackson, also raised cows, mules. He owned a sawmill and a cotton gin. Over the years, he had operated a store and a distillery, and even invested in a boatyard. Hundreds of its acres were dedicated to growing the all-important cash crop, cotton. As Jackson turned to his own interests during the spring of 1813, Mr. Madison's war consecrated more than 1,000 miles north of New Orleans. For once, good news arrived from Canada. The U.S. Army had captured York, Ortonio, in May, although drunken American soldiers had plundered the place, violating the rules of war by burning most of York's public buildings in celebration. But the rest of the news was bad for the Americans. The British continued to ravage the coast, burning the city of Urban Grace, Maryland in May. Reports circled of women and children running for lives as the attackers looted the town's church. A month later, the ill-fated Chesapeake was captured once again by the Royal Navy, and the president fell ill with bilious fever. At Montpelier, their home in Central Virginia, with Mr. Madison and Delaware. Miss Madison worried he might die. In Tennessee, however, the summer passed peacefully until, with August arriving away to September, life in Andrew Jackson's West took a sudden turn. In a matter of days, two events would alter the course of Jackson's life. One almost killed him, the other accelerated his rise to the status of a genuine American hero. Caught in the crossfire years earlier, Jackson, known for his fiery temper, had fought several duels. As an angry 22-year-old, he had issued a challenge over a minor courtroom disagreement. Both duelists had fired harmlessly, and they realized their argument was not worth dying for. The more serious matter of a slander to Rachel Jackson's honor had led Jackson to an armed face-to-face with the sitting governor of Tennessee, John Silver. In 1803, once more, however, no blood has led the conversation in a cascade of insults. In 1806 duel, he killed a man who had called him a worthless scoundrel and a coward. Jackson had sustained a chest wound when a lead ball broke two ribs and lodged deep in his left lung. The injury would never interrogate, causing periodic lung hemorrhages later in life. In 1813, however, Andrew Jackson most wanted to fight America's enemies, not argumentative opponents. In June, one of his officers, William Girl, asked the general to be his secretary. Girl was to do just Benton, the younger brother of another of Jackson's officers, Thomas Hart Benton, and exchange of insults between the two men had escalated until Benton, believing his honor as a gentleman, had been in question, abandoned satisfaction. Jackson tried to talk his way out of participating, knowing he had nothing to prove and much to lose. "I'm not the man for such an affair," he told Carroll. "I'm too old." But his attempts to negotiate a peaceful solution failed, and the duel was fought with the journal signing by. Unfortunate for Jackson, this was not the end of the matter. And June 14th, and the June 14th to just Benton sustained a wound to his buttocks, which some saw as a sign of cowardice, since it meant he had turned his back. So both Bentons were blaming Jackson, who had been charged with making sure that the duel was fairly fought, where the public accused him of overseeing a duel conducted in public, accused of saying the duel conducted in a savage, unequal, fair, and base manner. The general, deeply offended, let it be known that he would horsewhip Lieutenant Colonel Thomas A. Barton the next time they met. On September 14th, a hearing the Bentons were in town, Jackson went to confront them. Horsewhip in hand at Nashville City Hall, the action quickly escalated. Gunshots were exchanged, and Jackson was left bleeding profusely after he led from Jesse Benton's pistol smashed the general's left shoulder and lodged in his upper arm. Jackson's blood soaked through not one mattress but two, and the doctors saw no alternative to amputate. But Jackson refused. "I'll keep my arm," he managed to say as he blacked out, and respect and fear in which he was out met. No doctor would go against his order. Rachel arrived from the Hermitage to attend to her husband, and for many days Old Hickory seemed suspended between life and death, but he refused to die. More than 2 weeks he would pass before he could rise from bed. Then the courier brought news of an Indian massacre of settlers at Fort Mims, more than 400 miles away. Rustic Creeks were responsible, led by Chief Red Eagle, also known as William Weatherford, the son of a Native American mother and a Scotch trader. Red Eagle and Spanish creeks had surprised the inhabitants of a small village inside a crude stockade near the Alabama River. The news was shocking, although protected by the militiamen on August 30th, 1813, all but about the roughly 300 inhabitants, including many women and children, had been slaughtered. As a U.S. Army reported from the scene, some days later, the devastation was terrible. The remains of Indians, Negroes, white men, and women and children lived in one punkish ruin. The main building was burned to ashes, which were which were filled with bones. The plains and the woods around were covered with dead bodies. Emerging from his fever-induced dilemma, Jackson absorbed the news and saw the call to action. Fort Mims must be avenged, and soon enough, Governor Blinton and President Madison so ordered. It wasn't lost on doctor that Fort Mims, located within range of the Gulf Coast, would bring much closer to New Orleans. Once again, running concern about possible British invasion, though he still lay on what might have been his deathbed. Major Andrew Jackson issued his own orders on September 24th, 1813, for his brave Tennesseans to assemble. 2,000 of his division were gathered at Fayette, Tennessee, in 2 weeks' time. Jackson's left arm and shoulder were unusable thanks to his injuries, but he made a promise. The health of your general is restored, he told them. He will command in person, not even a near fatal gun brawl could keep Andrew Jackson from doing his duty. March into battle. A month to the day after the Sitting Hall gunfight, the first of the Tennessee volunteers headed south. Don Coffey, now Brigadier General, sat on his horse, and the head of the resistance. Andrew Jackson, though gaining strength, he was still recovering, but Old Hickory sent a message that was read to the men. The blood of our women and children recently spilled at Fort Mims calls for our vengeance. He exhorted, I must not call in vain. It must not call in vain. Jackson would not be far behind Coffee, mounting his horse 3 days later. Pale and drawn, he pushed himself hard, even though his left arm was in a sling. Just Britain's bullet still lodged in the bone. As November approached, he caught up with his volunteers, and they made their way into Creek country. Supplies would be continuing a problem so far from civilization, but Jackson would not be deterred. Impatient though he was, Jackson considered with care information on the enemy provided by friendly Creeks, Chickasaws, and Cherokees, setting aside his deep distrust of Indians. He urged his comrades to make allies of Native Americans who had not chosen to join the Essex uprising. Out of instinct rather than a military training, of which he allowed Jackson understood that intelligence concerning his enemy's forces would be invaluable. When his spies reported a large enemy force a dozen miles south of his encampment on the Cosal River, Jackson ordered General John Coffee and his brigade of 900 horsemen to attack the rustics at the island community known as Tolutchi. Jackson was not there, but a young Englishman named David Crockett witnessed the battle. I saw some warriors run into a house, he remembered years later. We pursued them until we got near the house when we saw a squaw sitting in the door. She placed her feet against the bow. She had it in her hand and then took it out. Raising her feet, she drew with all her might and let it fly at us. She killed a man. His death so erased all that she was fired on, and at least 20 balls blown through her. This was the first man I saw killed with a bow and arrow. The American forces outnumbering the Tolutchi defenders 5-1 disgraded the rustics just as Jackson had ordered. After counting 186 dead warriors, Coffee reported not one escaped to carry the news. Jackson arrived to inspect the smoky ruins of Tolutchi. No wholesale slaughter of families occurred, and Coffee's forces held 84 prisoners, all women and children. Jackson's interpreter, an Indian trader floating a creek, brought a Native American infant to the general. The boy had been found in the embrace of his dead mother. When we urged to give the child nourishment, the surviving Creek woman had refused. All his relations are dead, they reportedly said, so kill him too. Having lost his own mother in wartime, Jackson was moved by the orphan boy only hours after ordering the assault on the Indian camp. The general mixed a few grains of brown sugar with water and coaxed the tiny child to drink. Charity and Christianity says he ought to be taken care of, he wrote Rachel. The boy named Logje Wakon would be adopted as a member of their family to be raised and educated at the hermitage as if he were the couple's blood child. As he had been ordered to do so, Jackson avenged the Fort Mims massacre, yet while the war Jackson could be ruthless after the aftermath at Tolutchi revealed the strong instincts as a father, not only to his men, but to the meek and vanquished. Jackson talks Talagay. 6 days later, Jackson faced a test of his personal toughness. Not all Creeks had taken up arms against the Americans, and Jackson promised to protect the friendly Indians, who also include Cherokee and Choctaw, as he assured one American ally. If one of your head is hurt, I will sacrifice 100 lives to pay for it. He got his chance with arrival at Atlanta on November 7th, 1813, of an express rider having grunted and rooted his way through rustic oleans disguised beneath the skin of a hog with a head and hooves still attached. The messenger brought word that an estimated 1,000 warriors had besieged the settlements of friendly creeks at Talanke. William Weathered Regal and his rustics stood poised to do the brothers who were allied with the enemy what they had done to the settlers at Fort Memes. Andrew Jackson was in no condition to feel this call to action as if the wounds to his useless left arm were not enough. He needed help mounting a charge, simply unfolding a map poised on John's. In case of disunity directed for years, he has suffered almost constantly from intestinal problems ranging from bouts of diarrhea to constipation, but now the discomfort was so intense that he had trouble sitting up straight. Still, pain could not be allowed to stand in the way, and slouched against it. After he abruptly conceived a plan, Jackson and his men were on the march by midnight. I need to take a drink. As he rode to the endangered Indian settlement at Talhawkay, he leaned forward on his saddle, almost hugging the neck of his horse, attempted to ease his abdominal pain. The ride was more than 25 miles long, but by sunset the following day, Jackson's army, consisting of 1,200 foot soldiers and 800 men on horseback, made a camp within range of their destination. Again, Jackson did not sleep, but questioned his scouts about the terrain as he formulated a battle plan. At 4 a.m., he ordered his sleeping men awaken. His battle orders on Jackson himself described them and allowed it to Governor Blount. Called for the advice of the infantry in 3 lines, the militia on the left, the volunteers on the right. The cavalry moved into 2 extreme ranks and were ordered to advance in a curve. With the bulk of his forces fixed in position, he ordered 3 mountain companies of men armed with rifles and muskets to advance. Jackson expected the hostile Indians to attack this American vanguard, which could then fall back as if in retreat. The Indians in pursuit would come into range of his largest force, where his cavalry could trap them in a deadly crossfire. The fight began with the roar of Indian guns as Weatherford's red sticks, naked, but the red war paint burst from a dense thicket. They were like a cloud of Egyptian locusts, David Crockett wrote, screaming like the young devils had been turned loose, with the old devil of all at their head. The plan unfolded as designed, and the rustics ran directly into Jackson's traps. A hail of American bullets began to take a terrible toll. Although Indians, some with guns, mainly armed with bows and arrows, fought back. There should have been no escape, but Weatherford and his large country the creek swarmed through a gap in the line. Though some of Jackson's men pursued them, several hundred warriors escaped to the hills. Into the hills. When the dead were counted, Weatherford had lost 299 and Jackson 15, and Jackson gained a new nickname to the rest because he became Sharp Knife. The inexperienced journal, despite a usual to left arm, his body more than a little wasted by dysentery, had masterminded his first big battle and led his men to victory. Although Jackson, as ever, was ready to carry on the honorable fight, the result of Tonga will be the last good news for many weeks to come. Chapter 4: A River Dyed Red. The power of the creeks is, I think, forever broken under Jackson. Andrew Jackson faced new challenges as the winter of 1813-14 approached. In the back of his mind was worry about a British advance on New Orleans. In fact, a British admiral had quietly proposed such a move a full year earlier, but the much more immediate concern acquired Jackson's attention. His volunteers had little food and no feed for their horses. With an expected supply of shipments delayed, Jackson saw that his stubborn troops were growing more reckless by the day. He realized that despite the victory at Tonga less than a month before, his army was about to come apart at the seams, and if his volunteers deserted, he would be able to fight neither Indians nor the British. After weeks of calling, Jackson finally had threaten his men to store order. When one brigade of first volunteers prepared to head for home in early December, Jackson showed himself facing the desertion of his troops. He patted his mount in their path because his left arm was still in a sling. He rested his musket on the horse's neck. Looking down the barrel at the minister's men, he warned, "You say you'll march? I say, by the eternal God, you shall not march while the cartilage can sound fire." General Coffee and Major John Reid took up positions on either side of Jackson. No one moved for long minutes until several loyal companies broke the ranks and assembled behind the trio. Out of fear and respect for General Jackson, a few of the rebels moved in the direction of the camp. Others followed, and no one headed back to Tennessee that day. Jackson also faced a deadline. The first volunteers had enlisted for 1 year and expected to be discharged from service on December 10th. Many lacked clothing necessary for a winter campaign, and their farms and families awaited their return. "If they do not get home soon," one officer told Jackson, "there are many of them who will be literally ruined." The commander sympathized with the plight, but he saw the enlistment period differently because he because they had been dismissed for the summer. The soldier Jackson reason had yet to serve 12 months, and their tasks remained unfinished, with dangerous sticks still at large. Jackson was again forced to face down his own men. He told them they could depart only passing over my body. He tried to shame them into remaining and saying they were about to become the tarnishers of their own fame as they went into inglorious retirement. He said he expected the reinforcements would soon arrive, and some did, but several of those regiments were also nearing the end of their enlistments. On January 1st and January 14th of 1814, finally realizing there was little he could do to salvage the campaign, Jackson released the majority of his men without extending their obligations. Meanwhile, Jackson's health deteriorated. Years in found him still unable to maneuver his left arm to the sleeve of his coat unassisted. His army was dwindling by the day. About all he could do was write home to Tennessee. At 11:30 at night on December 29th, 1813, he opened his heart to his wife Rachel. He bemoaned the shameful desertion from the post of the volunteer infantry and the apathy displayed in the interior of the state by the fireside patriots. But his letter offered his wife's assurance, Be not uneasy. If I have trials and perils, God has fortified me with the fortitude to do my duty under every circumstances. In the next hour, he wrote harder words to his old friend Governor Wilmot, reminding him that the fight had to be carried on to protect the people from the Creeks. The Indians needed to be exterminated or conquered, said Jackson, and he challenged the governor to act. Are you, my dear friend, sitting with your arms folded? The Jackson letter was an intense demand for help, aroused from the hard weather creature. He wrote, Give me a force for 6 months, in whose terms there is no doubt, and all may be saved, withhold it, and all is lost. Before her bomb could react, still more enlistments needed, and the army encamped rejected amounted to just 183 able soldiers, and the dangers had grown. Jackson's spies brought word that British troops had landed at Pensacola. This could be only one thing. As long expected, the enemy had to be preparing to assault the Gulf Coast, in particular its most important city, New Orleans. Jackson must somehow keep his army together. He must prevail against this first foe and be ready for the next. Meanwhile, Red Eagle's fame continued to grow. On December 3rd, while Jackson struggling to keep his army together, Weatherford confronted the forts of Mississippi. Militiamen again outnumbered. The rustics fled, and Red Eagle, riding his prize gay arrow, took the only avenue of escape. He saw racing along a high bluff overlooking the Alabama River. He pointed to the horse toward the precise and drove his spurs into Arrow's flanks. From a height of roughly 15 feet, both rider and horse took a flight. They seemed to float in midair before plunging into the water. The astonished Englishmen watched. Neither man nor animal was visible. Entire submerged, then Weatherford's surface, still astride his mount. With one hand he grasped the horse's mane with the other and held his gun aloft. The troops only used musket volleys as arrows swarmed for the opposite bank, but despite the hail, men and beasts reached shore safely out of range. Red Eagle dismounted and inspected his steep ruins. Fighting on, he rode off the creek to survive to fight another day. As to Jackson, he could only hope that when the day came, the two of them would finally look each other in the eye across the line of battle. Early in the new year, fresh recruits finally arrived from Nashville. Although 850 men had little or no military experience, Jackson wasted no time. He ordered a march deep into enemy territory. The news force that meant the enemy fighting skirmishes with the Red Eagles braves the two Red Sticks villages in late January 1814. Though he and his men managed to prevail, the battles were hard fought, and Jackson himself was nearly killed when he rode directly into the fighting. In the midst of showers and balls, which he seemed unmindful, one officer called it, he rallied the alarm, halting them in their flight, affirming his columns and inspiring them by example. After the near debacle, Jackson pulled back to drill his inexperienced men. His army continued to grow, and not just with fresh recruits from Tennessee. Jackson's reputation was beginning to travel further afield. From the first time, U.S. regulars were put under his command. In addition to the military raising, the total troops in Jackson's armies rose to more than 3,500 men. Before long, his spies reported that William Weatherford and 1,000 warriors waited almost 100 miles away in a village overlooking the Taloopsa River. Jackson was determined to make this the creek's last stand. This enemy posed a dual danger. They were a threat to the frontier life, and they had chosen to ally themselves with the nation's larger enemy, Great Britain. The British were known to be providing the creeks with supplies. A few months before, American musclemen had intercepted the creeks with loads of supplies offloaded from the British at Pensacola. Jackson scouts, among them David Crockett, informed him that the Indians were encamped at a place called Horseshoe Bend. The enemy used a great U-shaped curve of the river as a moat to protect them on three sides. The Creek warriors, together with several hundred women and children, inhabit the cluster of huts at the southern end of the 100-acre peninsula. A narrow neck to the north provided the only land entry across which the Red Sticks had constructed a a breastwork built of large timbers and earth. This fortress was 8 feet tall and 350 yards wide. It was lined with portholes through which Indians could shoot at attackers. General Jackson was impressed. Nature furnishes a few situations as well as eligible for defense, he reported to government, but barbarians have never rendered one more secured by art. And with all his men outnumber the Creeks, conquering this fort would be not so easy task. Despite Jackson's inexperience with military strategy, he was undoubtedly, after all, he had aptitudes that couldn't be taught. Unrivaled courage, natural leadership. He was soon discovered uncanny battle instincts. Working with his advisors, he devised a plan. At first light on March 27th, 1814, General John Cavendish cavalry headed out with a band of Cherokees and friendly Creeks per Jackson's orders. They were to take positions south of the enemy village along to the bend of the Talupsa on the opposite bank. From there they could shoot any resistance attempting to escape Jackson and his men. Meanwhile, Jackson marched the rest of the army directly toward the breastwork. They halted, remaining there ready while the artillerymen set the two cannons. At 10:30 a.m., the word that Coffee and his men were in place, the cannoneers fired. The cannonballs did little damage, but bouncing away or thudding harmlessly into the steady pressure. Any rustic who showed himself was quickly the target of heavy musket fire from Jackson's line. By remaining behind the earthwork, the Greeks mocked their attackers with war whoops. On the other end of the peninsula, a different attack began. When Jackson's gunners were starting firing on the fort, some of the Indians in Coffee's command charged the river under fire. They plunged into water, swarming across the river, and seized their enemies' canoes. And on the opposite side of the bank, after battling back in stolen vessels, they ferried 200 Indian and 30 Tennessee militiamen to the creek side. Began to fight their way towards the rustic village about half a mile away where Jackson's men were fighting. As soon as set hut aflame and marched on to join Jackson in attacking the Indian fort. When Jackson saw the billowing smoke rising from the village, he ordered his men to charge. He prepared his troops for this moment. An hour of battle, Jackson's general orders from 3 days earlier. You must be cool and collected. When your officer orders you to fire, you must execute command with the deliberation and aim. Let every shot tell. His men did as he ordered, and despite a storm of enemy bullets and arrows, the first attackers soon reached the ramparts. There they fought muzzle to muzzle, the Tennesseans and the Indians shooting point blank at one another through the portholes. The first man to scale the wall and go atop Major Leroy Montgomery collapsed onto the breastwork. Life flash shot through the head. A platoon leader named Sam Houston next led the charge. Brandish brandishing his sword at terrific arrow penetrating his upper thigh. But Houston didn't fall. He leaped to the ground inside the fort. His uniformed men closed behind him. Overwhelmed by this breach of their trusted wall, the rustic defenders retreated into the nearby brush, in which they fired on the invaders, but their attackers had every advantage. More men and more guns. The momentum of the battle even saw the Indians continue to fight. Sultan Sam Houston, at his order, another officer withdrew the barbed arrow from Houston's left thigh, opening a gaping wound. When Jackson called to men attack the Creeks holding a nearby redoubt, Houston picked up a musket and led the charge. This time he took 2 musket balls, one entering his right arm, the other his right shoulder. The battle raged on, with Jackson's men clearly winning the day. Even so, the outnumbered Indians refused his offer to surrender in the early afternoon. Firing upon Jackson's messenger and his interpreter, wounded one of them. The Creeks preferred to fight to surrender, and the battle went on. The carnage and dreadful Jackson's would write to his wife, a few rustics would escape in the night, but the morning barely counted total 557 Indian corpses. Many more Creeks had died trying to escape. The treasure had dyed red with human blood that had carried away an estimated 300 braves. On Jackson's side, just 23 soldiers lost their lives, while his Indian allies lost 23. Radical no longer command a viable fighting force, and by mid-April, most of the Creek chiefs had presented themselves at Jackson's camp under flags of truce. They accepted that they were not in a position to detect peace terms, but General Jackson was, and before negotiations could begin, he made one simple demand. He wanted the man behind Fort Meade's massacre. Only when William Rutherford was innocent, he could the Creek War be ended. A few days later, a lone Indian arrived in Jackson's camp. The stranger had fleshly sought to try across the rope of officers and was directed to the general state and rode out by Jackson was emerging. General Jackson looked up in surprise at the man riding the handsome gray horse, bare to the waist. The light-skinned Indian wore buckskin breeches and moleskins. His next statement was still more surprised. I am William. I'm Bill Weatherford. More than anything else, the desire to avenge Formulas had driven Jackson over the preceding months. Now the man responsible for the massacre stood unarmed before him. His first response was anger at Weatherford's nerves. How dare you show yourself at my tent after having murdered the women and children of our musically? His second response was about how Jackson had captured the Indian leader. His second response was possible had Jackson captured the Indian leader, the general would not doubt his orders to speedy execution. It had never occurred to him that Weatherford might surrender. Now Jackson had to decide what to do with him. I had directed that you should be brought to be confined, and you appeared in this way. I should have known how to treat you, he told Weatherford. I am in your power, the man replied. Do with me as you please. I am a soldier. I have done to the white people all the harm I could. I fought them and fought them bravely. If I had an army, I would yet fight and contend to last, but I have none. Many of my people all are gone. I can now do no more than weep over the misfortune of my nation. To the surprise of his men, all had agreed did not order Weatherford's imprisonment or execution. Instead, Jackson offered Radical a deal. He would grant him his life and liberty if he would serve as a peacemaker to the Creeks who were still fighting. If he chose to fight again, his life should pay the forfeit of his crimes. If he chose peace, you will be protected. Weatherford took the deal, telling Jackson that those who would still hold out could be influenced by only a mean spirit of revenge, and to this they must not and still not sacrifice the last remnant of their country. You have told us where we might go and be safe. This is a good talk, and my nation ought to listen to it. The man's manner and words left a deep impression on Major Ray. Therefore, he wrote, possessed all the main lines of a statement of all heroism, so all comprehension of the intellect calculated. To make an able commander, his looks and gestures, the modesty and yet the firmness that were in them, unlikely as it might seem, Andrew Jackson recognized a kind hearted spirit as tone and fearless as any he had met with him. Here was a man who understood the rules of war, the man who knew the time had passed for the bloodshed between the Creeks and the settlers, and he could help ensure the peace. With the U.S. victory at Horseshoe Bend, the Creeks war was effectively over. The Creeks recognized that their only chance was to bargain and help with the help of Radical Jackson, and negotiated the Treaty of Fort Jackson. And on August 9th, 1814, the Creeks chiefs signed it, agreeing to give the United States and the man they called Short Knife more than 22 million acres of land. The American settlers were now safe and had room to expand. Red Eagle helped make the case for peace, having retired from making war as for Jackson. Even with the Indian treaty in his hand, he had not so much luxury. He was ready on hearing the sound of British footsteps moving toward New Orleans. Word of Jackson's battlefield success reached the War Department. This man Jackson, whom they had mistrusted as a stubborn and crude Westerner, was outperforming Washington's military strategists and his aging generals. His troops both loved and feared him. To everybody's surprise, he had made an effective fighting force out of volunteer militia. He knew when to be tough, and he knew when to temper that toughness with kindness. He was fearless in battle, but not reckless. In fact, he balanced his courage with great caution and surprising patience for gathering intelligence and listening to the advice of others. He knew when to stand firm on his convictions, but wasn't blind to the possibility of compromise. Finally, and most important, he possessed a natural instinct for military strategy that made up for his lack of formal training. Even Secretary of War John Armstrong, whose orders Jackson had quartered within Nazareth, recognized Jackson's potential. Something ought to be done for General Jackson, he wrote to President Madison after news of triumph at Horseshoe Bend elated the nation's capital, where politicians were weary of war that was draining the treasury, brought too few victories to cheer, and had gone on longer than expected. Something had to be done for Jackson, and on June 18th, 1814, Militia General Jackson was promoted to the rank of Major General of the regular U.S. Army, a larger and more powerful command. Jackson's rise to the national prominence could not have come at a better time. After two decades spent fighting in France, the British had forced Napoleon to abdicate in April. That meant the Royal Navy and its immense army of the victorious Duke of Wellington could be sent to engage in the fight in North America. After an invading force was already cruising in the middle of the Atlantic coast, warning President Madison and his cabinet what would unfold elsewhere wasn't clear. But with Jackson in command of the 7th Military District, with encompassed Louisiana, Tennessee, and all the Mississippi Territory, it became Jackson's job to ponder what might happen in his region. This was also the responsibility he had long wished for, as he wrote to Rachel from his quarters in Creek County, near the Colusa River. I owe Breton a debt of vengeance. In Jackson's view, Henry's ultimate objections were clear enough. The British wanted New Orleans. Anyone who could read that map knew by that capturing the city, His Majesty's forces would consolidate control of North America continent from the Gulf Coast to Canada, and that could end the United States' westward expansion. For Jackson, the prospect was unacceptable. In August 1814, his army was small. His Tennessee volunteers had returned to their farms and shops, defeating the Indians, and had just 531 enlisted soldiers. But Jackson's knowledge for what the British might do was even small. He knew neither when the British warships might land, nor how many troops they carried. What he was certain of was that he and his army had to move south immediately. With the creeks disposed of, he could focus on protecting the coast from his European enemy. 2 days later, the Creek Treaty was signed. Jackson and his little army set off towards the Gold Coast, marching as quickly as they could. The new reality of British threat fed an existing fear. Those who read the papers already knew the British could be ruthless. The previous summer, the craftsmen were rampaging through Virginia countryside, committed terrible atrocities. One woman was seeking to escape was said to have been sailed up to her waist in the water and dragged on shore by 10 or 12 of these officers who said they decided upon her after pulling off her clothes, stocking and shoes, etc. And another report claimed a sick man was murdered in his bed, although, according to one congressman, the town of Hampton and the surrounding country were given up the great pointer of a malicious soldiery. Such stories linked with rumors of the impending British approach promoted General Jackson, sitting in his cell for 400 miles, to think very hard about the possibility strategies for preventing the same of happening to the people of the Gulf Coast. Yet, even for the most powerful military in the world, the attack on New Orleans would not be a simple matter. The Royal Navy might lead the siege, but to get to New Orleans, the ships would have to sail 100 miles up the Mississippi. Along the way, they would face American guns and shooting tides and civil short terms in the river. Making for a slow and dangerous approach to their objective. Though he had no naval experience, Jackson understood these obstacles and guessed that the British would avoid a river assault, assuming the British would launch an overland attack against the city. Jackson considered his possibilities. The Mississippi Delta, south of New Orleans, was swampy moors of bayous, would be particularly impossible to march across, and the British had no easy land access from the north. Thus, Jackson and his advisors concluded that their enemy would come from the east. If the British were to send a land force from the east, where would they land? Jackson believed that the most likely site was Mobile. A city 150 miles to the east, with its own protected bay. When on August 22nd, he rode into Mobile with his army. He was already thinking of one move ahead. Although he never visited New Orleans, he would somehow find a way to protect the city unlike any other. I'll pause it here for now and continue reading, maybe after lunch or whatever.